So hello and welcome. We're just going to wait for a moment for people to join the webinar here. And as people are joining, Nikki is going to put the diversity statement in the chat. We acknowledge as a virtual event, we span many traditional territories. For me in Toronto, this meeting is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's now home to many First Nations and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit. This webinar today is produced by MAiDHouse. MAiDHouse is a nonprofit organization devoted to providing those eligible to receive medical assistance in dying with a supportive, an inclusive, and a comfortable setting. MAiDHouse is a national organization. So if you would like to use the chat just to let us know where you're joining us from, you're most welcome to. It's always so nice to see people from across Canada at our webinars. And sometimes we also have friends from the States joining us. So welcome. If you've been to one of these sessions before, you'll know that we generally keep to the same structure. This is our third or fourth book club series, and we're always lucky enough to feature the author and also a reader with either lived or working experience in MAiD. Today, we're going to be talking about Sarah Leavitt's graphic memoir, Something, Not Nothing. And we always leave time at the end for questions. If you have a question about the book, or if you have a question for one of our panelists, please add it in the Q&A box. And I see the chat is going off. There's people from Toronto and Calgary, and also from the West Coast. And from Edmonton. Hi. I hope that everybody on the West Coast is staying safe, and the storm passes quickly. Oh, hi from Miami. Amazing. Today is a special day. It is National Grief and Bereavement Day. It's a day to focus on connection and dialogue, both with each other and also in an advocacy role in our workplaces and with our government representatives, to normalize conversations around grief and loss, and also think about ways that we can support people that are living with grief and bereavement. So I want to thank everybody here for joining us today for this discussion. And I am proud to present our author panelist, Sarah Leavitt. Sarah is the author of the graphic memoir, Tangles, a story about Alzheimer's, my mother and me, and which is currently in production as a feature-length animation. She is also the author of the award-winning historical fiction comic, Agnes Murderess. She is an assistant professor in the School of Creative Writing at UBC in Vancouver, where she has developed and taught undergraduate and graduate comic classes since 2012. And also joining us today is Tekla Hendrickson. Tekla is the executive director of MAiDHouse, and she has extensive experience both locally and internationally in managing, operating, and advising not-for-profits in areas of health promotion, homelessness, and also women's rights. And today we're going to be speaking about this incredible book. I don't know if many of the people have a copy of this, but you're welcome to throw it in the chat if you have read it or if you have a copy. This is a story about Sarah Leavitt's partner of 22 years, Donimo, who died with medical assistance after years of chronic pain and a rapid decline at the end of her life. About a month after Donimo's death, Sarah began making comics again as a way to deal with her profound sense of grief and loss, and the result is this incredible and remarkable book. So welcome everybody, and hi Sarah.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I actually got a little emotional when you were doing the introduction, so we'll see how I do.
That's okay. We're allowed to get emotional here. This is how it goes. But I was hoping, if you wouldn't mind, and I know we have to do a little bit of screen sharing here, if we could start with an excerpt from your book.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Hold on one moment, and I will just pull this up.
We're doing like a collaboration here because I was having some tech things, but it will all go smoothly. So maybe I'll just say, like, before I start reading, so this is a cover, obviously. Thanks everybody for being here. And I know that a lot of you have your own experience with, certainly with grief and perhaps with MAiD as well. And the first few pages I'm going to read are from the beginning of the book, and they are about my partner deciding to die. So just, I assume that you came here knowing that this could be troubling, but yeah. And Stan is just gonna advance the slides, and I'll read from them. So this is from a chapter called Questions. It's just the first few pages. Mostly my head is full of questions, in case you're wondering what it's like to go to bed alone and lie where she used to lie and try to sleep. How did she? How did we? What was she thinking when what was the last time we? Some of these questions might be answered in my journals. During the last weeks, I could only write in small booklets of folded scrap paper. The thought of recording any of this in a bound book, no. And I can't look at those booklets now. When she got up the last morning, went to bed the night before, made sure her hair, how? What about that moment before she left the house for the last time and she said, "I'm sorry to leave you with such a mess"? How did she even form the words? And there's a lot of very experimental work in this book. And this is probably, many of you are familiar with the wording of like the threshold for being able to be granted permission to have MAiD. And one of the things is that you must have a grievous and irremediable medical condition. You must. You must be at a point where your natural death has become reasonably foreseeable. You do not need to have a fatal or terminal condition or a specific prognosis as to how long you have left to live. At this point, you are asking for cedar branches and cherry blossoms in your bed to hold on to breathe in. The first doctor came. She listened. Maybe she held your hand, but she said no. She could not reasonably foresee. At this point, you are asking for cedar branches and cherry blossoms in your bed to hold on to breathe. Sometimes I would come into the bedroom and you'd be holding crushed flowers, broken twigs, desperately seeking comfort, escape from your bed. At this point, you were terrified. At this point, I was terrified. You wanted to find a way to stay. You wanted to stay. You were scared they wouldn't let you die. I wanted you to find a way to stay. I wanted you to stay. I was scared you would stay. The second doctor came. She said, "I can see you. Have tried everything, have suffered terribly, are suffering, have no more options." She said, "I approve your request." She said, "Stop worrying. I will find the second doctor. I will make this happen for you." This no nonsense, this pragmatic, this straightforward doctor. Her words were holy and terrible.
You. I was hoping, I want to get back to that moment there in that book, but maybe a little further on in our webinar, because I want to talk a little bit about those conflicting feelings that you wrote about. But I was hoping that you could give us a little background on you. I read your bio, but this is not even your first graphic memoir. Did you want to tell us a little bit about how you became an artist?
Oh, sure. Let's see, how much time do you have?
Okay.
I'm one of those people that, I think all of us draw when we're kids, and I really love drawing. And then I kind of got really insecure about it when I was a teenager because, somebody told me I wasn't a very good artist or whatever happened. And I set it aside for a long time and tried to get into art school and didn't get into art school. And then in the in the very late 90s, my mom got diagnosed with dementia. And I had done like little doodles and stuff for friends before that. And I still like worked on art in my own time, but I started making in my journal, I was making notes about my mom's illness and also making sketches of her. And so after she died in 2004, I put like my drawings and sketches into a little booklet, and I had started getting interested in making comics. And one of my writing teachers was like, I think you need to make a graphic novel or graphic memoir about what happened with your mom. And so that's really when I started, and I had a mentor who was really important to me. Her name was Mary Schendlinger, and um, she drew comics for this Canadian literary magazine called Geist. Anyway, I'm getting a bit granular now, but
No,
I
no,
always
no, that's okay.
her name because she was like this at the time, this woman in her 50s, as I am now, making comics, and she was this huge inspiration for me. And um, yeah, and so I made that first book about my mom dying, and now, you know, um, 20 years later, um, I mean, well, 16 years after my mom died, my partner died, and then I made a book about, and in between I made a book about a murderess. So I don't know, but I'm actually a very normal person. I just tend to write about that. Um, but that is how, like, I did start making comics because my mom was ill, and then it just became this form that was really, I just really loved it. And I was doing writing as well, and like doing some freelance writing, and I was a writer in my work, but comics really just kind of took over my life at some point.
And so the piece that you just read, that's the start of the book. Look, there's a preface, and then we kind of catch you midstream.
Mm.
Um, and was that the first thing that you wrote after
Mhm.
Donimo died? Like, when did you realize you were writing a book?
That was a while. That took a while. She died in April 2020. So kind of right when everything was first locked down for the pandemic.
It was a crazy time.
It was a crazy time. And after she got approved for MAiD, we I forget how we found this out, but um there's an agreement between, what would it be, like Health Canada and provincial parks or national parks. Anyway, there's some agreement between, it doesn't matter, different parts of government, where if you want to have if you want to die outside, you can. And so Donimo did die outside by a river in North Vancouver. And um, that was, so yeah, anyway, that was in April, and I started drawing again like in May. And at first I was making these little kind of 4-panel comics, and I was posting everything on Instagram. So you're more than welcome to like look at my Instagram
Okay.
account. But the first things I drew were these like little 4-panel comics. I did this workshop with a cartoonist named Teresa Wong, whose work I really recommend. She lives in Calgary, and there was a series of free Friday night online comics workshops because everybody's trying to figure out like things we could do online to stay connected.
Yeah, yeah, to stay connected.
Yeah. So she did this workshop that was like, draw things you see around you in your pandemic life. And I took it as this opportunity to draw things that reminded me of Donimo. So those were the first ones I did in like May, about a month after she died, were like these comics that are like 4 things that remind me of you. And I did a few of those. And then I think that I made those pages that I read, I think I made in September. So
Okay.
that, yeah, so I kind of gotten into using more abstract imagery, which I didn't at first, and kind of it was messier and more poetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's Tekla, I don't want you to think that I'm ignoring you here. I because Sarah brought up a really interesting point about like just how poetic and beautiful the work is. And I was wondering if you have seen in your work instances where people are using art to express emotions that they either have trouble sharing or they're just like it's just impossible to talk about.
I think what I've seen at the day of provision, we've had people who come and done crafts, like they crafted together before. So a form art, definitely a lot of music has been, people have responded to the artwork in the space. Like someone reminded them of where they grew up, and other people talked about it being quality art. So I've seen those kind of things. Few people have used poetry and written word to express. So that's the way I've kind of seen how we cross it. Um, at MAiDHouse, I mean, again, as a form of art, we are also doing the quilting. If you know of someone who has died from MAiD and want to do a house quilt and join it together. And I believe there also will be a project soon where people can do virtual quilts as well. That's with another organization, but people could look at that for that announcement. So that's how, when you look at some of the quilt pieces we've got, they're very artistic. People incorporate a lot of memory and love into those pieces.
I've seen some of them, they're just like they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
So Sarah, there's parts of the book that are like sequential, but also there's parts that kind of go back and forth in time. And there's 2 pages, I think it's on page 39. If you have the book, if you're at home and you're following along. Or if you don't, you should buy the book because they're like these really great. There's this one here is a scientifically accurate visual representation of the 12 stages of grief. And the landscape almost looks like an alien landscape or like something that you would draw of like the inside of a cell in grade 9 biology class. Like it looks strange and foreign and like, and something you've never seen. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the pressure to have things progress, like kind of in this an orderly Elizabeth Kubler-Ross kind of way, like I'm going to feel anger and now I'm going to feel denial and then I'm going to accept it, and how sometimes that process isn't exactly linear.
Oh yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't linear. I actually felt quite fine in the first few days after her death. Like I was crying, but I was like, wow, this is going quite well. I'm seeming to be very much on top of things. And I think, it was shock, and I'm sure lots of people have experienced that. I think it was shock, and it was also like relief that you have when she was suffering so horrifically that it was like this like relief of like not worrying about her and not being scared. I was so scared all the time. So, and then I think things started to kind of sink in. I went through lots of different, I don't even know that they're stages. They're kind of permutations or variations on grief. I mean, there is in my experience, there's a progression in that I'm definitely not in the same place now. It's been about 4.5 years. Um, but yeah, like there's part of what I was trying to do was communicate. I had this just really strong need to communicate to other people what the experience was like. And I guess and this happened when I was writing about my mom as well, as like one of the main feelings I had was that it was so strange. And like you're talking about those landscapes, like I have a couple pages that Stan was talking about where I'm like, oh, this is the stages of grief. And it's just kind of like sarcastic because it's these weird landscapes. You can't really tell what's happening. There's a lot of kind of abstract shapes and cut up words in the book. And I felt like a lot of the time I just didn't have language to talk about what was going on, you know? And so I felt like color could express what was going on, or shapes could express what was going on. Or if I chopped up or repeated words in certain ways, it felt like a more accurate description of what was going on. But yeah, I do think it's a really, I feel like there was a part of me that knew intellectually that going through grief wasn't a, you know, a linear progress, but you still get that pressure inside yourself, sometimes from other people. I think the biggest pressure is on yourself, where you're like, why am I not over this yet? You know? Yeah.
And Tekla, like I think you and I have talked about it, and you've shared that like just looking through this book about the kind of the very non-linear journey of grief, and having things that are just like just impossible to talk about, like with those the shapes and the colors and
Yeah, I just found it really powerful. I'm a pretty verbal, cerebral kind of person, and but I was so impacted by the drawings and the colors. And I know at the work at MAiDHouse, you know, we bear witness and we support this profound love and relief and nervousness, a deep need and a sense of control, but often witness stuff that I lack language to communicate. And so it was really a relief to kind of see some of the graphics and just the color and the use of space and get a sense of feelings and go, oh yeah, that's what I'm feeling, not being able to put it to language, but able to kind of see that visual representation and, you know, not struggle to find those words. So, you know, the one I thought was very powerful about page 16 and 17 about the process, about, you know, Sarah, you're the one who called to find out the information about medical assistant and death, about how you have to wait, how you don't know how you're going to do this, how Donimo is going to do this, and, you know, what you're going to do, you know, how can we do this? Maybe we can't, but maybe not, right? It's all kind of really expressed in there. And I think, and it's just very powerful, particularly when people think it's so easy to get made. But I think the graphics really show the kind of turmoil and the efforts that people go through for that, and how you hold space to be present and support, and how silence, which is also, I think, conveyed through the colors and the space, is also super important. How you are like present and silent, and how important that can be in the journey.
it's a really excellent point about silence and what a gift that can be. Sarah, I was hoping you could read again, if you don't mind, some of the series of pages about the title of the book, and I'll share my screen again here.
While you're getting the screen, I'll just pick out, like on page 31, the slide of gray, you know, just of how you're feeling after. And again, just really powerful. Again, no words, just images and color.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, we can talk about this later if we get there, but yeah, it was really important for me to have like abstract imagery and color and fragmented words, and I was very influenced by poetry and very influenced by other cartoonists who have used abstract imagery to convey really intense emotions. Yeah, I can recommend a book after I finish reading this, if I remember. You know, I am in my
I'll remind you. Yes.
like a 3-second. Oh no, I'll say it right now. That's what I'll do.
Okay.
There's a book called The End, and it's by a cartoonist named Anders Nilsen, Nilsen. And it came out in the early 2000s, but he just re-released it. And it's a really beautiful book about his partner dying. They were in their 30s and she died of cancer. And he made this comic, and his work is usually very detailed and kind of just exquisite. But this book, he really, when he's talking about his grief, he goes from kind of drawing these like pretty realistic figures to stick figures, and then just kind of it explodes into collage and abstract imagery, and it's a very powerful evocation of grief. So yeah, it's called The End, about or by Anders Nelson, yes, and it's in the chat. Okay, so this is the last chapter in the book, Something Not Nothing, and it's obviously what the title of the book comes from. And this is just the first 3 pages of the chapter. What comes after death? For most of my life, I've mostly thought nothing, the same thing that came before birth, blankness, emptiness, the end. I think it was 6 or 8 weeks between her starting to decide to die and her death, 42 or 56 days. We spent the time asking, searching, what is, how, and then we found an essay by a rabbi about life after death. When his rabbinate began, he believed there was nothing. But he started sitting with people as they died and watching. He watched for decades, thousands of deaths. He began to believe in the Olam Haba, the world to come. My friend once told me to spend 7 seconds on each blank panel, but you know, just imagine that I spent 7 seconds. The rabbi said, I have learned that there is something, not nothing, out there, waiting for us. Something wonderful and loving and peaceful and joyous. We were surprised by how much these words comforted us, how deeply we believed them.
You. I've read your book maybe about 3 times now, and I always feel a little teary when it comes to those pages. There's something that's so comforting about those words, but it also releases something in me, like a unlocked fear almost. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the title of the book.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, there's a few different levels, but one thing I was just thinking about, like as I was reading that and then listening to your responses, she and I were both so scared. We were scared of what would happen if she wasn't granted MAiD and she had to keep living with that level of pain, which I don't know what we would have done. But we were also really scared about her dying, and neither of us is religious. But she had a very, very strong kind of spirituality that was connected to nature. And she started reading a lot about kind of ideas that after you die, like your molecules kind of get redistributed in nature, and that she, so she would exist in these different ways in the world. I personally need more reassurance than that, but she was she came to a place where she felt okay about that. And I had this book that I had for some reason for a while of collection. It was a collection of Jewish writings about death and dying. And I'm Jewish, but Donimo is not Jewish. But we found that book really comforting, especially, I think the actual chapter is called Permission to Believe. And the book is like a collection of writings by different Jews, because it's very common for Jewish people to disagree. And there's lots of different beliefs within Judaism. Some Jews do not believe in life after death and others do. So yeah, I think we started thinking more and more that there was there was something after death. We don't know what it is, but there's something. And we're like, we are going to believe this rabbi who has sat by all these bedsides. But I also started thinking of it as for myself as well, that I was really, part of me just didn't know how I would keep living if she was dead. We'd been together for 22 years, so I'd been pretty young, like I was in my 20s when we got together. And yeah, it was just hard for me to even kind of picture my life after her. So I felt like at some point I had this realization of like, oh yeah, it's not just her life after death, it's my life after death, and that I still exist, even though she died. And there was part of me that thought that that was not possible. So, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the title is like, the book really is about me. I made a conscious decision, like there's not a lot of stuff in there about our relationship or about her.
Yeah.
It's really like kind of documenting my process of going through grief. And yeah, it's like my life after her death. Yeah. I think that was one of my ideas for a title, was My Life After Your Death, but it felt like kind of, I don't know, unkind or something.
But there's also an element of like her as there and also not there, right?
Mm.
Like she is also something, she's not nothing anymore, but there is still her somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting your entryway into the book, right? So for mine, I'm really looking at the work we do at MAiDHouse and thinking about it from the medical assistant and dying perspective. So that something, not nothing, what just came to me now when you read, which I didn't pick up on when I was just reading it myself, is often on the day of a provision, certainly more than once, someone who's going to have MAiD ask the provider, what's on the other side. Like, so you're getting ready for the day of, and so the MAiD providers have some very interesting responses about, about what's on the other side, mostly saying we don't know, and let us know when you get there, kind of thing. But that seems to be a theme of people going, I wonder what's going to happen after. And up until even on the day of a provision, and not for all of them, but for some people, it's certainly a question people ask on the day of. The other thing that I took from the book that I thought was really interesting is it does really frame the experience of that, this is not nothing that happened, that that Donimo died and you're grieving. That is something. And we don't give a lot of space or time or place for that in our Canadian culture, like how we approach and how that grief. So, it mattered, the death mattered, it mattered to you, and your grief matters, right? So something, not nothing. I also think, we use that line when we're talking to people planning for the day up, because Sarah, you kind of alluded to even like applying for MAiD and after, there's so much business associated with death and dying and grief. And there's so many logistics we have to, how are you getting there? What time are you getting? Who's coming where? That we kind of say, just want to take a moment that this is not just nothing, that this is something that I imagine you'll have a lot of feelings. So we actually use those words, this is something, not nothing. So to see it in a title. And it also was informed, interestingly, from another book, which we talked about earlier, where we did a book club about Many Faces of MAiD. And one of the people who shared their stories said, they felt like they were talking to this professional, and it was like they were booking a dentist appointment. And it's like, I'm not just booking a dental appointment. This is like a day of death for my loved one, kind of thing. So again, that whole concept of like, this is something, not nothing, both how we experience it, but how we create space and time for it to happen, and the conversations we can have. Because again, Sarah, you talked about like, many of us are okay talking about the good, like I felt okay about it after, but like there is deep agonizing grief both before and after. There's like, what am I going to do? I see people who've been together for 50 years and they're wondering, now what's with my life? And then you call and they go, well, I'm still feeling it. It's like, yeah, well, you had 50 years. So, 2 weeks after, you're not going to. But again, because we're so like, let's contain it, let's put it in a package, and it all should be one thing, right? So again, that's something, not nothing, and all those messy, conflicting feelings. So I just think the title really frames the experience and gives a lot of space for different emotions, which I thought was very powerful. For sure.
Thank you.
Tekla, like when you were talking, it kind of reminded me of something about like the deaths that are foreseeable, and or a death of somebody who's older too, and how we can sometimes diminish that experience for other people, as though you were expecting it, or it was coming and you knew it was coming. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to change gears slightly. Sarah, can we talk about animals
Sure.
in the book? And your cat might make an appearance. At some point, my cat might make an appearance. There's quite a few animals in the book. Like just on the cover, there's this kind of hungry beast of the cute couple. There's therapy pony. There's a lot of different horses. There's a tiny therapy pony, a cheetah, and Sadbird, and even Jackson, your dog, features prominently. Can you talk about your decision to add these animals, and are they helpful conduits to like expressing those like difficult feelings and having those difficult conversations? And I can share my screen if that seems appropriate right now.
Yeah, do you want me to read the piece first, or do you want me to talk about it, or?
You know what? Why don't you read, and then
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And hilariously, my cat has just come over and she's like scratching my office chair. If you
Oh,
hear
so she
any
knows.
noises, just everything's okay. Um, yeah, so this is called Until Next Time, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but um, until next time. A couple years ago, I started drawing lumpy horses. I think it was a reaction to trying really hard to draw horses correctly for my last book. I ended up with a character called Therapy Pony, who is probably actually a horse. Therapy Pony is calm and loving and wise. They have some friends, Mouse, Tiny Therapy Pony, and Sad Bird. After some time, Cheetah appeared. Cheetah is regal. Cheetah has chronic severe pain. Cheetah and Bird started talking about what it was like. Then February came, 2020. Bird and Cheetah's discussions had broken down, and I didn't care. Of course, Cheetah was a version of Donimo, and Sad Bird was a lot like me, and I was too sad to draw anything. But what about now, February 2021? Well, I've been catching glimpses of Cheetah, and then today, there they were, whole and beautiful. Hello, Cheetah. Suddenly you are translucent. Yes. And now we are small. Things are in flux. We're flying over flowers. We are flying out of flowers. We are outside. Inside, there are roses and oceans, and we are both here at the same time. Cheetah. Yes. Yes. Cheetah. Yeah. Yeah, I started I guess the fall before Donimo died, when I didn't have any idea that she was gonna die soon. There's my cat, Stella.
Oh,
Um, yeah. Uh she I had started drawing this comic where I don't know, I had all these like characters like Therapy Pony and stuff who just kind of said little things about life and the world. And then Donimo's health got worse over the winter, and then she went into the hospital in February with very like new severe pain. She had a condition called ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is like related to, it's kind of like long COVID, or it is. Sorry, that was my cat falling off the shelf. Um, yeah. So anyway, she had this condition where you just kept having new symptoms and her health was just rapidly declining. And she went into the hospital, and this neurosurgeon told her that he knew what was wrong with her and he was going to help her, which of course was not true. But that's a whole other story. And so around that time, when she went into the hospital, I just couldn't, I was like drawing and posting on Instagram and I just couldn't do it anymore. And so as I was working on the book, sometimes those characters would come back into my head. So I made that comic like, you know, kind of almost a year after she had died. And those animals offered me ways to kind of, I think, just again, like express the weirdness of life and the weirdness of experiences. And then, yeah, there's some comics about Jackson, our dog, in the book.
With like the cutest ears.
Yeah, he was a papillon, so very small dogs with ears like giant butterfly wings. And he was amazing. And it's funny because one of the people who's here is my friend Paul, and we met through Jackson. So it's actually very to me that Paul's here. Hi, Paul. Yeah, so Jackson was, you know, the center of our lives, and he was with us when Donimo died. So he was, she was lying on a bed, and he was right, like kind of by her shoulder, and he was a huge part of me being able to live after she did. He was also very old at the time, so I knew I was about to experience another death, right? So he died 1.5 years after she did, which was in some ways just as traumatizing. Like it was, yeah, he was old and I knew he was going to die soon, but he had a very rough death, and he had to be put down, and it brought up a lot of things. Yeah. So he's in the book. There's a chapter about having him and taking care of him after she died, and a chapter about him dying. Yeah, I don't know. And now I have this cat, which is kind of strange because Donimo was allergic to cats. So we did have a cat in earlier years, but we would never have had one again. And so, you know, I got her, well, hilariously, she moved in around the same time that my new partner moved in. But I almost found it weirder that I had a cat in my house when
Then
Donimo had never had a cat in the house. But I'd already figured out the like loving somebody else, but while still grieving Donimo. But the cat was like harder for me in a way. Like, it was, yeah. Anyway, she's amazing. But sometimes I think she can see, like, you know, cats are weird, right? Like all of a sudden she'll be like looking in a corner of the room, and I'm like, do you see Donimo? Like, I don't know. Anyway, that was maybe going off in
No,
another.
no. That's all good.
I mean, what would we do without animals, right? Like, I feel like without animals, without art, without like being able to make little messy drawings, like I just don't know how we would deal with it that we end up dealing with. Yeah.
Tekla, are there animals at MAiDHouse? Have there been animals at MAiDHouse?
There has been animals at MAiDHouse. We've had up to 3 or 4 dogs, mostly dogs, have joined us. So yeah, variety of different dogs who come and are part of the experience for sure. And it's not about animals, but just because you had brought it up, I thought, again, you talk about messy drawings, but really powerful drawings, because you talked just about, when you were talking about the animals as a slide, that neurologist who came and said, you know, I can't do anything. And again, you capture it on page 122 and 123. You say it's kind of a complicated experience, but it's like, you know, 2 pages of this thing of what that's like to go, and people say they can solve things, and, you know, and then, so I know you were talking about animals, and we definitely have had animals, but as you can tell, I'm not animals. I don't get a lot. I get more from your drawings and stuff of what you do than I do from the animals. And yes, they're at MAiDHouse, and they're very important to the people who bring them.
So, okay, Tekla, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to Cheetah and Sadbird for just one moment. But in a different way, because there's this really kind of dreamlike quality to them, almost kind of like archetypal, almost a little Jungian. And sleeping, being in bed, dreaming, those are things that come up so much in this book. Of course, Donimo is spending a lot of time in bed at near the end of her life, but was that purposeful to have that theme?
I don't know. I don't know if it was purposeful in that. I mean, one of the things about this book is that I made these comics over a 2-year period. So this is kind of just me making them as I'm making them. And when I realized like, okay, I do want to put these together in a book and make a collection out of it, I did do some sorting, like, there's work that I didn't put in, and there's a couple things I added in later. But oh my God, I totally lost my thread. Oh yeah, the um the dreams and memory, dreams and sleeping and memories. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's intentional, but one of the things that I think about a lot is how I do feel like she's here, but I also don't. And it's really, really hard to put into words. So I say things in the book like, like sometimes I can feel her, or I can imagine that she's kind of like in this. I used to feel this a lot more, was that she was in certain very particular places in the house, like kind of up in a certain corner of the ceiling. And there were times when I really, like, when I would come in the house often, I was used to coming in the house and calling her name. So there were just like very particular times when I felt her, but it's a little bit like life after death. It's like, I kind of believe, I kind of don't, and I kind of don't know what's true. So I can't like very authoritatively say, after her death, Donimo came to visit me and she was there and I saw her. It's more like, did I catch this fleeting glimpse, or did I like feel her in this way?
But I think you convey that really well throughout that book, those glimpses and lost, and like the impact of the death. And, page 24 about like the profoundness and the glimpsing and the cells with the very mundane of Jackson the dog pooping, right? Like, and how it's some of the day-to-day, the most mundane brings up the most powerful memories. And it's not always like, the holiday or those other things. It just catches you off guard. And I think, again, you talk about catching those glimpses, and I think you convey that through the imagery and, the pictures as well. And I think the other thing it really shows is the importance both of the day of death, the day of provision, and leading up to, about building those shared memories, and how if you have a chance to plan and, giving the rock and sharing words and what that means, and being outside kind of grounds you as a memory to have an anchor with as you're going through those grief. Because while there was pain and stuff, I imagine there was some beauty to, we are there. I imagine you surrounded in love, a little bit of hurt about maybe not special words for you particularly, but just all those memories that you anchor you as you go through this rapids and currents and of the grief. And I think I've seen that many times at MAiDHouse, where people are building that kind of shared collective memory, and then they can support each other as they move forward, right? Doesn't take away the pain and the sadness, but I hope that over time it takes some of the edges off, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Tekla, you mentioned like the stones.
Yeah.
And like throughout, Sarah, your book, there's like, you can really see BC in your book, like the trees and the water. And there's so many elements of nature, like the stones, the trees, the flowers. And, we saw in the first reading, Donimo is like holding on to the cherry blossoms and cedar. Did you find nature grounding or helpful?
Yeah, definitely. She was somebody who just loved being outside. She wanted to be outside all the time. She was a very adventurous kind of daredevil before she got sick. she, she grew up in the country. She was an athlete. She was a motorcycle rider. All things that I was not. I was much more timid and likely to be inside reading a book, but she was very much wanted to be outside. And so one of the most important things to her, and I think that was one of the reasons why she really didn't want to, I mean, she couldn't have kept living because of her health, but she could not bear the thought that she would never get to go outside again.
Mm.
And so she got out to our patio as much as possible when she was dying, and we brought in, like, there were just this, like, there was a little group of us. There were me and 4 other friends who were our bubble. And one of the things we did was go out and cut cherry blossoms and cut different flowers and bring them into her room. And yeah, after she died too, it was really important for me to be outside. And I remember like the week anniversary of her death was really so difficult. And my friend and I walked up to a park near my house, and we looked at this. I think it's an American elm, but it's a tree that has a lot of like kind of seed pods in the spring, and they all line up in this very geometric way. And there was something about that and looking at these beautiful patterns in nature that made me feel more connected to her and stronger. And so, and I often felt like, I imagined her in the sky, and I all these feelings that I don't really have as much anymore, but I would often I could imagine her when I was outside. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. The Tekla MAiDHouse is not, it's not outside, but
Yeah.
are there elements of nature that you have brought into the space and
I,
just to
I,
make it
I
less
I
institutional?
think people bring flowers and things like that and candles with scents and stuff. But yeah, that's one of the limitations of our spaces. We have a lot of really good natural light, but we're not immersed in the nature, which I think would in the future be great to add on to our space. And Stan, I'm wondering as well if we should move soon to the last and get some questions from the audience.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So Sarah, are you okay to read the final excerpt? Okay, and I'll share my screen.
So this is a 2-page comic that's called Year 2, Week 1, because that's when I made it. So as probably most of you know, like that first year marker can be a really huge moment. And yeah, so I drew this comic right after that. Do not attempt to predict year 2. You do not know this place. That's what the experts say anyway. If you see strange mountains ahead of you, or containers of, or weeping, or in reality, you have no way of knowing. So take a deep, try to stay in. Shh, because again, no one knows any. This coming year could be any or all of the possible. Just remember, everything is going to.
I love that ending. Everything's going to.
I mean, it is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. If anybody has any questions, there's no open questions, but Sarah is here. If you have any questions for Sarah about her book or Tekla about her work.
Well, we're waiting for any questions. The other thing, going back to the nature again, Sarah, I think the book, the memoir, the graphic memoir does so well is holding the different feelings. Like, yes, you got comfort, but nature, but sometimes you were like, screw you, nature, you live a long time, or you're impossible. Like, I resent you and you represent everything I lost. Like, why you? And uh, I think that is just indicative of what the whole memoir does, of those kind of juxtapositions of the different feelings and thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I was, I think like grief is such a weird thing. Like it's, and people told me this and then, I had to go through it to kind of believe it. But there was a lot of joy during that time. Like I discovered this way of making art that felt very joyful to me. I had beautiful connections with my friends. My dad came and was present when Donimo died, and he and I had this like beautiful connection. Um, and there was joy in just knowing that she wasn't suffering anymore and that she had, she could stop. Like she was constantly working to try to deal with her chronic pain and her chronic health conditions, and that she could stop, right? So there was joy and relief. And then I was also mad a lot of the time. I was, and I feel like when I was reading about MAiD before she had MAiD, I don't know how much people feel like they can talk about that, like being furious at your partner for choosing MAiD because she chose to leave me, and there was this time where she said, she apologized to me for doing, for choosing MAiD. And I was like, it's absolutely your choice. Like, I don't ever want you to feel bad. And I'm mad at you. Like, it's like all these times and all these aspects of things that are very like contradictory at the same time. I can answer the question in the chat. Thanks. So what's next for me? This is a long story, but I'll say it quickly. I had thought that my next book would be about MAiD, and I got a small research grant, and I did a bunch of interviews, including with Tekla. That was like a couple years ago. My
A
research
while ago, yeah.
and that project is like kind of on indefinite hold because at one point I was like, what am I thinking? Like I did this book about my partner. I don't actually want my next book to be about MAiD. And I also think it was a little bit unclear what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to do like an educational nonfiction kind of consideration MAiD because obviously this is a completely different thing, but like I have a lot of feelings about MAiD and a lot of thoughts about it. Beyond my bottom line support for it, I have other thoughts. So my next project is probably fantasy. I've had this kind of like fantasy folklore kind of idea that I've been playing with for a number of years. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Right now, I'm still kind of just messing around with stuff. Yeah.
But given that your book is about grief and you say the focus is about you and grief, I do think the front end where you explore the process of coming to that decision, the support, the day of, is really well represented in the book. And, even you talk about your anger, but you basically made agreement that you would try to find ways for Donimo to live, but also to support her finding ways to die, and whichever kind of unfolded in the most, made sense. But you were holding both of those, desires at the same time. So, I mean, while you might not have done from the interviews, I do think there's some really powerful stuff about MAiD specific that is in the Graphwork memoir that I think really captures, again, that's often not captured.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I might do work on in the future. I just kind of was like, right now, I don't think I have it in me to write a book about MAiD.
Yeah.
And that's fair. That's a great question. Thank you, Tracy. We actually have one question, but I don't know if Tekla, do you want to get to it or should we answer it later? Tekla's going to be our decider.
I am reading it. Yeah. I mean, how we deal with a philosophical question is not up to us to choose when to die or how to die. It's up to God or other. I mean, I think, again, those people are just making meaning in their own beliefs in person and how that works, right? And I think you talked about that, Sarah, in terms of finding power in that message from the rabbi and also the becoming cells. So I think that, again, we're creating meaning and that's very personal. And people certainly at MAiDHouse bring their own deities and their own traditions into, you know, from nothing to quite elaborate. So I see that across.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for this beautiful, it's just a gorgeous book. We're just so lucky to have you here today. A really deep bow of gratitude for your honesty and your openness, and also a deep bow of gratitude for Donimo, who's here and not here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And while I am saying goodbye, would you mind throwing your Instagram handle in the chat? Because I know that was something that you mentioned with some of your drawings. Thank you to Tekla also for joining us today. Thank you for your work at MAiDHouse. Thank you to Nikki, who set everything up. She's not on the screen here, but she sets everything up in the background. And most importantly, thank you to everybody who registered and who joined us and had incredible questions and filled the chat with all the places that you're coming from. Thanks to Paul, Sarah's friend. Just a reminder that MAiDHouse is an organization that's run solely on donations. And if you like the session today and you'd like to learn more about MAiDHouse, or if you're interested in becoming a donor, you can find us at maidhouse.ca. I'm going to share my screen one more time, and if you could stay for a short survey at the end.
Encourage people to buy the book, and if people do want to commemorate someone who has died through our quilt project, they can go online or email us to find out more about that.